Hello, I'm Sue Nelson, a science journalist and author, and welcome to the Royal Society of Chemistry series discussing chemistry and climate change as we look forward to COP26, the United Nations Climate Change Conference in November. For nearly 3 decades, the United Nations has been bringing together people from almost every country on Earth for global climate summits. As you'd expect from the Royal Society of Chemistry, they'll be showing us that chemistry is vital for understanding and tackling climate change, with a focus on batteries and energy storage. In this series, we'll showcase chemistry's contribution to electrifying the planet's energy transition to net zero and powering new discoveries and innovations. Today, we're going to be discussing biohybrid approaches for sustainable energy conversion. This is a flourishing research area that combines the strengths of synthetic and materials chemistry with biology to deliver sustainable, renewable energy solutions. And these involve the creation of diverse biomaterial interfaces for electron and/or energy exchange, and also includes the mimicry of biological active sites and processes by purely artificial chemical strategies. Now, discussing this and answering questions and more are an international panel of 6 experts across the chemical sciences. I'll introduce them to you one at a time so that they can sum up their area of expertise. And we'll start with Professor Shelley Minteer at the University of Utah in the United States.
Hi, so I'm a faculty member in the chemistry department. I'm an electrochemist by training, but my research area is at the interface of interfacing both enzymes and microbes with electrode surfaces.
Thank you. Also in the US, we have Professor Dan Nocera from Harvard University.
Yes, I'm from Harvard University. I developed this area called proton-coupled electron transfer, and wrote the first theory about that. And that's how protons and electrons couple. And that's at the heart of energy conversion. And it's something that biology has mastered. And so there's a lot of lessons to be learned from biology in this area of PCET, and then applied to our energy problem, which again, biology has worked out, and now we all try to mimic.
Thank you, Dan. Let's go from the United States to Europe now with Professor Nicolas Plumeré, who's from the Technical University of Munich in Germany.
Hello, yes, my name is Nicolas Plumeré, so also electrochemist and chemistry department. So with the focus really on interfacing the enzymes from nature with electrodes, really trying to accommodate the interface so that the robustness, the activity, and the selectivity that we find in nature can be reproduced in real systems for energy conversion.
Thank you. Moving to the University of Cambridge in the UK now, and Professor Erwin Reisner.
Yes, hi, Erwin Reisner. I'm also from the chemistry department, and I'm Professor of Energy and Sustainability, and we currently develop 3 research approaches. The first one is the sunlight-driven conversion of waste, in particular biomass and plastic waste, into sustainable energy carriers. The second one is the conversion of the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide into sustainable fuels. And the last one is about biohybrid approaches, and that's what we talk about today. So our real interest is how to combine materials, semiconductors, with biocatalysts such as enzymes or microbial systems for more efficient fuel generation.
Thank you, Erwin. And also from the University of Cambridge, we have Dr. Jenny Zhang.
Yes, my name is Dr. Jenny Zhang, and I'm also at the Department of Chemistry. My background's in electrochemistry and chemical biology, and I am a research fellow and a group leader at the department. And our research interest is really in living biohybrids for energy conversion. In particular, we're really interested in looking at photosynthetic organisms. We feel there's a lot of lessons, mechanisms, machineries we've yet to extract from this incredible process called photosynthesis. So that's my research interest.
Thank you. And the last of our 6 speakers is Professor Marc from the University of Paris in France.
Hello, everyone. I am at the chemistry department of University of Paris, where I'm a chemistry professor. And I'm a physical organic chemist, so I am using all tools from both molecular electrochemistry and molecular photochemistry to look at fundamental chemical reactivity under reaction transfer which ends up in looking at catalytic processes. And as Dan Nocera noticed, once you combine this electron transfer to proton transfer, you are just right in the middle of a lot of natural and bio processes, which can give inspiration to look, for example, at CO2 reduction or nitrogen activation. And this is exactly what we are aiming for.
Thank you very much. Now, the discussions are going to take as their starting point a question from attendees of the recent Chemical Science Symposium. And we're calling them provocations. And provocation 1 comes from Oren Bahar from the Technion in Israel, who was a poster prize winner at the symposium.
My question to the panel is, why do we need new biohybrid systems? This field aims to combine the advantages of both biotic and abiotic entities. And we can find in nature a few nice examples, such as magnetotactic bacteria, native biomineralization processes, etc. So considering the high potential of biohybrid systems, why don't we see more examples in nature? For example, why plants did not evolve to harvest energy using semiconductors, which are much more efficient?
Thank you. Dr. Jenny Zhang, would you like to answer Oren's question for us?
Thank you. So thank you very much, Oren, for that question. So basically your question is why biohybrids and why didn't biology evolve more efficient systems? I'm just paraphrasing here. So I'll start with the second part. So essentially biology and nature didn't evolve its machineries for our needs. So when we talk about the need for efficiency, that's very much a human need to sustain our energy consumption needs. Instead, what survives in nature is driven by survival of the fittest. It's whatever has evolutionary advantage. And so probably efficiencies for these type of conversion processes has been sacrificed for other gains. So for example, scalability of the overall organism and the components, versatility so that it can respond to different conditions, stresses, etc. And that could lead to less efficiency because you have more pathways that electrons can go down, and just other mechanisms for mitigating risks. So these are really important criteria that we need in any sustainable global energy solution. And so, this is why we're very much inspired by the lessons and machineries that are developed in nature. And of course, in science, we have been developing very efficient systems because that has been the incentive. We've been incentivized to do so. And so that's why it's really important that we now try to integrate lessons from both fields, have a more diverse and bigger tool set, so we can come together to find more sustainable, but as well as maybe versatile, adaptive solutions, as well as perhaps more efficient systems. So we can blend the strengths of the two. And that's why I think we need new biohybrid systems.
Erwin, would you like to add to that? Because within the question as well, there was a reference to nature, and particularly as you're specifically working with biomass and waste materials.
Absolutely. Also, thanks, Oren, from my side. I would just like to build up from what Jenny said. So first of all, nature has actually been using semiconductors quite a bit. I mean, this goes back to the origin of life, and at least there are theories that iron sulfides or pyrite semiconductors have been associated with the first formation of organics. Not maybe solar driven, but still semiconductors have potentially played a role. But when I think about evolution and why semiconductors are not used in plants, I think it's a really interesting question. And I think when it comes to evolution, nature probably takes a very pragmatic approach, building up what Jenny said, that you want to survive, etc. But I just like to delve a little bit into the chemistry. So the first one is carbon is almost ideal. And if I say carbon, of course, when you build chlorophylls or organics, that's all built from carbon. And the carbon is great because it's readily available, right? CO2 is everywhere, it's light, and the plant can just grab it out of the air. So it's very easy to drive carbon assimilation and respiration. So the release of carbon dioxide is again very easy. And that becomes much harder if you have a gallium arsenide semiconductor lead halide component. You can barely find it anywhere. And this also brings us just to the practicality of weight, right? The carbon is super light. So for a plant to grow, for the leaves to reach high, carbon is almost ideal. more to the chemistry, carbon also in terms of forming chlorophylls and compounds, it's great because we can make millions of compounds from carbon, and it's under kinetic control. This means that the plant or the organism can actually control the compounds it makes. Once your chlorophyll is destroyed, it can just make something else and recycle it. So I think when it comes to metabolism and repair, carbon is ideal in this regard. And of course, you could now jump in and say silicon is also amazing. We have probably more silicon, or equal amount of silicon than carbon, but then you're stuck with silica. And silica then is under thermodynamic control. So it's actually not so easy to take up silica and make something out of it. For us in the lab usually means hydrofluoric acid. And whatever chemistry you do, it's thermodynamic. So you cannot control the individual step and you cannot make many compounds from it, at least in a living organism. So I think with all these, if you factor all of this together, and if you think about sustainability, carbon is almost the ideal choice. And then you just make molecules and you end up with chlorophylls. And I think very easily put, you could say that the plant doesn't want to be an iPhone, right? An iPhone requires all these elements from all over the world. They're rare. You can build something miraculous, but we know the supply chains can break and then you're actually in trouble. So that's not good for plants. And that's my argument why they just made chlorophylls and not some high performance semiconductors.
I think you're going to have a job on your hands persuading people to give up their some of their smartphones, but perhaps when the environment and climate change is at stake, they will definitely take notice. Nicolas, could you add in here? You mentioned about using enzymes. So what's your opinion here in terms of the need for biohybrids and the role that biohybrids can play?
This will follow very much the lines from Jenny and Erwin. So nature has indeed been forced to get the elements it can have its hand on, and humankind will have the same issue. So we cannot mine forever precious metals or even less precious metals. We will run out and we will have to follow the same pathways nature has done, going for what's available. And enzymes, many of them are built just on carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, then iron maybe, and some other metals, but these are really accessible to us. And using either the enzymes directly or gaining inspiration from them is the pathway to sustain not only the reactions we drive, but also the source of the catalyst. So where we get the catalyst from is a way to make them sustainable going for biohybrid and bio-inspired systems.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next provocation now, which is from Julia Butt from the University of East Anglia in the UK, who was a speaker at the Chemical Science Symposium.
I'm interested to hear the panel's thoughts on using biohybrids to make fuels. To have a positive impact on climate change, which fuel would they aim to make and why? And what components would they put in a biohybrid to achieve this?
Okay, Marc, Robert, could you begin, please?
I would pick up methanol. I would pick up methanol for a couple of reasons. Which are that we have a renewable feedstock to make it, which is carbon dioxide. And this is a chemistry that can be achieved with 6 electrons and 6 protons. And even if it's a relatively complex one, there is already good indication that we can optimize biohybrid system or bio-inspired system or biomimetic systems with high efficiency and high productivity for making this methanol. This methanol can be used as a fuel for cars. It has some safety advantage over classical gasolines. For example, ignition temperature is higher. In low concentration, it's biodegradable, even if it's toxic at larger concentration. And so in such low concentration, for example, if you spray a lot on the ground, but in low concentration, if there is an accident, for example, there is relatively low toxicity and no persistence into the environment. So this is an ensemble of reasons why I would pick up methanol. By the way, you can use methanol in fuel cells, which is also a complementary use. And methanol is a platform molecule. It means that by using what bio is able to do, which is very often cascade processes or cascade reaction, you can even use methanol and to make other kind of molecules, other fuels, by combining, for example, CO2 to methanol electrolysis to further reaction with some organism that can grow with methanol. This is known in biology. This is something that researchers are starting to look at. So I think that we have here kind of a small molecule which is ready to be produced from CO2 electrolysis with some additional effort from the community, and that can be employed for powering cars or for even further use.
Thank you. Nicolas, do you have anything to add to Marc's suggestion of methanol?
So yeah, I fully agree with Marc. So methanol is really a great option, and surely there is not a unique answer to that one. In principle, one would ideally want a carbon-free fuel such as hydrogen, but that's possibly only happening in the long run because we still need fuels for powering the existing internal combustion engines, and carbon-containing fuels will not be avoidable in the short run. So I would also think that multi-carbon fuels that can be directly produced from electricity and from water and CO2 could be seen as an ideal fuel. And in contrast to methanol, I think there's much more research left to do there. So it's not really a pathway that is established, that is ready to go. And there are a few options. So one can think of maybe making, again, from CO2 reduction, simply formaldehyde that can be directly condensed and in longer chain molecules that are directly usable as diesel fuel. Or we can also think of making other multi-carbon compounds from CO2 using cascade of reactions. So enzymes, just like in nature, where a sequence of enzymes is fixating CO2 into longer molecules, and then use them again for making aviation fuels or diesel fuels that cannot otherwise be replaced by simply battery and electric engines. So the purpose is really to find ways to become more cost competitive compared to the fossil fuels. And in the end, you will not compete in terms of cost to make the initial molecules. It's always more expensive to produce something than just extracting it from fossil sources. But where we can gain, if you really get a pathway to make these molecules in a very selective manner, in a good purity, that we don't need all the purity, all the purification, all the refining steps down the line, then you really can make a step forward in this cost competitivity in terms of multi-carbon fuels. And that's really where the future is. I think it's not at all where we are at the moment. So we do need electricity to become cheaper. We do need progress in science to have better catalysts for these cascade reactions. And surely we also need at some point, more significant cost for CO2 emissions to be leveraged in terms of cost in terms of renewable fuels. So we really need efforts from scientists, engineers, and also policymakers to make this happen. And whatever the fuel is in the end, it will go through carbon-containing fuels as well, in my opinion.
If I may, another stringent condition is that we are able to capture CO2 from the air. This kind of stories has no sense if CO2 is not part of a circular economy in which you make the fuel out from CO2, you burn it, and then you recycle it indefinitely. And of course, to do that, we need to do direct air capture for grabbing this little CO2 guy.
Yeah, I also want to say that I agree with that completely. I think in terms of ideal fuels, until we can recycle it, I don't think there is an ideal fuel. Otherwise, it'd just be releasing CO2, especially the hydrocarbons we're talking about. So I think it really needs to be coupled with the recycling of whatever is being released. And so hopefully either being hydrogen or hydrocarbons will couple that with the complementary technology for recycling it.
If you're watching, you'll be pleased to know that we are recording a session on the circular economy tomorrow. So these sort of questions will be under discussion there in a lot more detail. So let's move on to provocation 3, which comes from Somali Weliwati from the University of Utah in the USA. Somali was a student poster prize winner at the Chemical Science Symposium.
My question for the panel is, how would you assess the status quo and future applicational value of biohybrids? To delineate my question, biohybrids have several limitations compared to more mature technologies. For example, biosolar fuel synthesis is more expensive than coal or conventional solar PV use, and inorganic solar cells have reported solar conversion efficiencies approaching 47%, which is higher than most biohybrids. With these kinds of limitations, are we looking at large scale or more niche applications for biohybrids right now? And what sort of a timeline are we looking at to optimize and implement their widespread use?
We'll get Dan Nocera to answer this first, particularly as Dan is the inventor of the artificial silicon-based leaf.
Yeah, so that's why you need COP26, because if you don't have incentives, you're not going to have any fuel near term. And so you're asking how fast will it occur? I'll turn it around and ask you, how fast does society want it? Because they have to pay for it. And it's that simple. You've invested hundreds of trillions of dollars in your current oil-based infrastructure. And there's no one discovery that's going to replace $100 trillion investment that's already paid off. And that's why you need things like COP26 to ask the world how much they want it. Now, to get down to more particulars, we invented a thing called the bionic leaf, which takes sunlight, air, and water to a fuel. And we did it at 10 times the efficiency of nature. So that already exists from an energy efficiency point of view. The second piece of this is, if you're going to make a fuel, you have to do it per unit time because you need a lot of it. And what needs to happen there, I think, for biohybrids is most biological things grow at a unit called 10 to the 9th CFUs, colony forming units. So that number's 10 to the 9th. To get to a manufacturing throughput, you would probably want to be up at 10 to the 12th, so 3 orders of magnitude faster and more. And that involves chem engineering and reactor design. And that's all doable, and it's within reach. Before fuels, there's one other thing you use a lot that puts a lot of carbon dioxide into the air, and that is other chemical processes, the most important of which is fertilizer to feed the world. And I can tell you that's already happening. So biohybrids are going to be commercialized, and it's going to be making fertilizer at cost that is competitive with chemical fertilizer, which releases a whole bunch of CO2 into the air. So there are examples that now exist that biohybrids will be cost competitive with massive chemical process like ammonia. However, I will say again, for fuels, you're going to need this policy piece integrated to science because of this massive offset of this oil-based infrastructure that the world has built. But from a technical point of view, it's increasing what's called cell density, and that will involve scientists and engineers working together in reactor design.
Thank you, Dan. This all sounds fairly promising. Shelley, would you like to chip in here, particularly as the question came from Utah, which is where you're based?
Yes, thank you. I think that, one of the things that we have to consider is the different sort of uses of biohybrids. And so if you look at, biohybrids and where it is sort of easier to use them for commercial applications and where it's more difficult. And so biohybrids for the last 20 years have been an area of study for wastewater treatment. And we've made sort of great advances there at extremely large scales and have sort of made it through all of those engineering hurdles that Dan was talking about. So then you're in a situation when you think about timeline where the timeline can be much quicker. If you then look at, say, fine chemicals and pharmaceuticals, the pharmaceutical industry has been interested in enzyme catalysis for quite some time. And so they've been sort of working through those issues, scaling up those issues, so they're not as far along in that engineering progression, but they've made great advances. When we get to the sort of fuel side of things, it's been much more challenging for us because we have to make something very inexpensively in comparison to a pharmaceutical company. Pharmaceutical companies can, put in sort of new biocatalysts, new enzymes every batch, and it's okay for them because they're selling a product that is so expensive. But if we're making fuels, it's not just about energy efficiency, but also about making something more inexpensive. And so our timeline has been longer because we really need to make systems that have great efficiencies that are not as necessary within the sort of pharmaceutical industry. We also have to make things that are very stable. Our catalysts have to be inexpensive. So there's a lot more sort of control issues that happen on the sort of fuel side of things. And so really, I think that, you have to take into account, the economics of every system, as well as the sort of technological development stage to figure out what the timeline is.
Thank you. Erwin, is there anything you'd like to add there?
Just very briefly, because I agree with the point made by Dan and Shelley. Just specifically to the question, and I think from a curious, enthusiastic student who wants to make things happen, it's a very legitimate question. Where's all of this going? Where's the application? And I think I also break it down in two. So if you compare photovoltaics reaching 50% efficiency and biohybrids, of course, the comparison is not quite fair. The stages of developments are very different, and PV is decades advanced compared to anything as a biohybrid. But ultimately, biohybrids, and I think we've heard this, is you can make chemicals that you really struggle to make otherwise from sunlight. If we take this purely synthetic approaches, at the moment it's still much more limited to simple compounds. With biohybrids, we really have a nice way, I think, to make a very broad range of chemicals that can potentially drive a sustainable economy. And the second aspect I'd just like to repeat similar to what I said before is sustainability. So again, if you think about a nice perovskite photovoltaic, very high efficiency, or some of the 3.5 semiconductors or others, of course we struggle with sustainability. They may be highly efficient, but ultimately in the long run, we will either run out of material or it's just a polluting process to make them. But if you can just paint some solar panels with some algae films, for example, I mean, they may not be very efficient, but they could be really sustainable and run for a very long time. So I say it's the scope of chemistry we can do and develop potentially much more sustainable processes.
And by the way, I don't, the PV piece or photovoltaic piece isn't exclusive of biohybrid. So you're using the photovoltaic to power the biohybrid in whatever way you want to do that. And so you want a high efficiency photovoltaic, you take that efficiency, then you have the efficiency of a biological process that uses, say, the electricity from the photovoltaic, where you use a small molecule that the photovoltaic produces, and you multiply that efficiency times the biohybrid efficiency. So you want the photovoltaic efficiency to be high, because that is a good light collector. And so they're not necessarily exclusive. And I think the question comes down to maybe you want to keep increasing the efficiency of the biology with the inorganic. This is a hybrid we're talking about in this little meeting. So you want both of those efficiencies to increase. So they're mutual with each other. They're not exclusive.
Great, thank you. And we've already got some questions coming through, and we will answer them after the next couple of provocations. So if you do have some questions, put them in your chat box and we will put them to the panel afterwards. We'll move now to provocation 4, which was from one of the session chairs at the symposium. It's from Vincent Artero from the University of Grenoble, Alpes and CEA in France.
My question is about the deployment of biohybrid technologies. To play a role in the change to renewable energy sources, a technology must be at the same time very efficient, very stable, and also scalable to a level big enough to supply hundreds of thousands of homes, for example. So what are the advantages of biohybrid technologies in terms of scalability, and what are the challenges to overcome?
Well, that's a big question to answer. Shelley, Minteer, let's hear your answer first.
Yeah, so I think Vincent brought up scalability, and I think one of the things that you have to think about in terms of the way that we would produce a large number of our sort of catalyst materials or electrode materials today is basically by mining more metal and then using that metal. And really, when you think about sort of using any type of biological material, it's a little bit different. So if you're mining material and you think about the sort of supply and demand, the more you start mining a non-renewable resource, the more expensive that resource becomes to you. So you even see this, ahead of time. So when fuel cells became sort of the thing to talk about in the early 2000s, the price of platinum skyrocketed. Because you could only mine sort of so much platinum. It's completely different if we're thinking about enzymes or bacteria. Basically, we can think about sort of scaling those up, and rather than sort of price going with scale, price going up with scale, price actually goes down with scale. So, so we can very inexpensively make enzymes. We can very inexpensively sort of grow bacteria. Because of that sort of inverse scaling situation. So I think producing your sort of biohybrid material is something that we can scale up quite well. The thing that we haven't really done as much of, I think, in the field is the scale up of the sort of reactors in terms of getting the engineers in there to scale up reactors. There are sort of niche applications where we have done scale up, but we haven't done as much of that sort of engineering and design. So I think that's an issue in terms of thinking about scaling up for say, efficiency and performance. The last topic that I think is probably something that's near and dear to all of our panelists' heart is that when people talk about biohybrids, they always talk about stability and kind of what your stability is and what your stability can be. There's a lot of room for us to grow there in terms of stabilizing our biological entities. We have lots of thermophiles and extremophiles that we can look at to learn from. But we also have, whole living organisms. Dan and Jenny both work with whole living organisms that can grow and reproduce. And yes, you don't want them to die, but they can grow and reproduce. And so there's lots of different types of stability and different sort of both materials as well as biological strategies that we can use to address stability in the long term.
Dan, what's your opinion here on scalability and challenges? Because obviously you've gone through a lot of those issues through working with the bionic leaf as well, I should imagine.
So Vincent, I think when we think of scalability, we always we kind of think about the world we live in, and that's the rich part of the world, by the way, not the poor part of the world. And remember, the poor will be driving energy needs in the future. And so it's going to look like a much different world. And there's the advantage of biohybrids. It's not going to be a centralized plant that's making something, and then you have to have a massive distribution system, which also has a huge amount of carbon associated with it. So the one huge advantage of biohybrids is it can be distributed. So I'll give you one example. This bionic leaf you mentioned, Sue, there's a carbon-based one that makes fuels, but we have a nitrogen-based one that makes ammonia. And unlike, say, the big Haber-Bosch plant, what we're doing is building little plants, and they're just little reactors with solar panels. And they get put right in, say, the Central Valley of California. And then they get put in China. You can put those in local farm areas. And so the way you're going to do scale up is you're going to do it in a distributed way with biohybrids. It's not going to be centralized with distribution and transportation. And that's a massive advantage of biohybrids. And then, like Shelley said, there's two types of biohybrids. We haven't really said that here. there's one where you use a cell, and the biology all happens in a cell, and you got to get energy, solar energy into it by whatever means. And then there's the other way, which a lot of panelists do. They work with enzymes. They take the heart of the cell, the reactive centers, and use those. And one nice thing about the cell, Shelley was mentioning the challenge of using enzymes because they're outside the cell and they're more fragile, is when the cell dies, another one's reproduced. And so there, it's how much energy do I need to keep the reproduction cycle going, to keep, just say, the manufacturing footprint the same. And it turns out you don't need a lot of energy to do that. And so in our bionic leaf C, it's less than 3% of the energy input is used to maintain the cell colony for growth. And so I think this huge advantage, this whole scale up issue is huge advantages with biohybrid over a technology-based world. And it is this idea of doing distributed energy and materials production. And then if you think about most of the energy demand of our future is coming from poor parts of the world, you know, this is something I think you can talk about again at a COP26 setting. Do you have the developing world and the emerging world with 6 billion future new energy users develop what we've done here in an expensive world? Or do you take a new path, and the new path might be distributed? And there, I think biohybrids is going to have a huge impact in this distributed approach to energy and food production.
It's quite interesting you talking about this different way of working. I mean, you may be aware that in the UK at the moment, we've been having in certain parts of the UK distribution issues with fuel. Do you think the sort of big energy providers are going to warm to and accept this new way of energy distribution, which puts effectively more power, and I don't mean that in a sort of pun way, but into the hands, as you say, of sort of smaller nations, cities? You can see this having a huge, making a huge difference, but just because it's good doesn't mean everyone will rush to make it so.
Yeah, in a way, Sue, what you're saying is you're distributing wealth. And
Yes.
People that own wealth don't like distributing wealth. But I don't think it has to be that. And to be perfectly honest, the group that can make it happen the most is the one with the wealth. And so I think, if people in this panel and scientists and new ways of doing things work, then you'll see those big players actually become the movers for that. And I'll give you one little example. I made a flow battery in 2011, and with a company I started, and guess who ended up buying it and who's really moving it? It's Lockheed Martin, one of the biggest engineering companies in the world, and they were a defense contractor. And so they have the power, and I don't mean, might, but they have the engineering power to actually go into a large developed world and make things happen. So to be perfectly honest, I don't think you can make even a distributed system occur without their help. Their pushback is going to be what's called ROI, return on investment. And so those companies are under huge pressure to return money to their stockholders, which, by the way, we all have in our retirement plans. And so we should all look at our portfolios. If you want to just say no more oil, you got to realize what that really means. And what you're going to have happen is it's going to have to be cost competitive enough for them to really move. That's what's holding them back. And that's why things like COP26 are really important. It's to start talking in a real sincere way, what will allow things to become cost competitive and what will we have to sacrifice as a world population and with different governments and countries in terms of wealth. So it really comes down to a wealth issue. But I don't think you can move forward without the big players, say the oil companies saying yes, or the big fertilizer companies saying, yes, this is the new way of doing things and we want to be part of it. It's going to have to happen that way. It won't be an us versus them. It's going to be a partnership.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Marc, do you have anything you'd like to add, or anybody else for that matter on this?
I may be over naive or over optimistic, but still, and despite what Dan just said, which I agree, of course, we need movers and investment of large company. I think that with this idea of distributed energies among citizens or small communities or whatever small scale, it may really trigger kind of a revolution in the way we are living, in the way we are living together, in the way we are traveling and so on. And so I think really here that there is something very special that can occur into which biohybrid can really play a role for the exact same reasons that have been developed both by Dan and Shelley about the scalability, but also about the ability maybe to combine at small scales efficient biohybrid systems with inorganic systems, keeping within very simple technologies. I'm sure it's possible, and what we are designing is in fact quite simple in our labs. And I think there is a way to something which is being completely different in the way we are using and producing energy, and biohybrid will play a role in that.
Well, let's go on to provocation number 5, which is from Gustav Berggren. He wanted to know, how can we work together and what are the risks, basically? But you'll hear for himself exactly his question in a moment. He's from Uppsala University in Sweden, and he was a speaker at the Chemistry Science Symposium.
Hi, Gustav here from Uppsala. My question doesn't so much relate perhaps to the hard science of biohybrid technologies as to the people involved. As developing these types of technologies doesn't just require that you bring together different techniques, but you also have to bring together a lot of different people from different backgrounds and with different areas of expertise. And what do you consider to be the main challenges in bringing together teams consisting of, for example, chemists, material scientists, and biologists, and ensuring that they can work together in a really productive and truly synergistic fashion? And to some extent related to this, when we create these large collaborative efforts that are required for developing biohybrid systems, do you think that there is a risk that we lose that sense of competitiveness between groups and disciplines that can to some extent be really helpful in bringing science forward?
That's a great question, and it really takes on actually what we've just been discussing in terms of collaboration on a sort of big scale and a political scale effectively, and working with big companies. Let's address Gustav's specific question about working together and with the different sciences. Nicolas.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So Gustav definitely makes a very strong point here. So we discussed here in the meeting the need for more breakthrough in biohybrid science so that we really bring it to the level where we can deploy them. And it will indeed happen with people working together on many disciplines, many expertise, and challenges for sure, as I can see a few, but one opportunity we have at the moment is that funding for very large scale projects are out there, so that there are projects with tens or hundreds of scientists towards one given objective. The risk is that in the end, even if we work together for given objective, we still have this separation in different institutions and limited exchanges. And usually it's fine. It's fine for projects where we have very technical objectives. Everyone knows what to do. Everyone is building up on each other's progress. But when it comes to really the complex fundamental challenges we still have ahead of us in bio-inspired and biohybrid systems, then often it needs more than just this very defined work package where we need to be more creative and to exchange much more. So being in a same location, being really together, sometimes in the same institution or even the same office is what is needed. So working together in very diverse disciplines with very diverse people in a larger group, maybe 5, 10 or even more people on a single objective, this is a challenge. So having funding, of course, for that, having the possibility to drive that is probably where we are still needing more vigorous help on the funding side. And I think that's where the breakthrough really happens. So where we have the scale of individual groups, where the discussions are fully open, this is where creativity and discovery happens. And I would advocate for also having not taking from the large projects, but also bringing additional funds into this single PI large projects, so that you can really make discoveries that at the moment are still needed in bio-inspired systems and biohybrid systems.
Thank you. Jenny, let's turn to you.
Yeah, thanks, Gustav, and yeah, I agree with a lot of what Nicolas says. And maybe to add to what he says, and also to answer Gustav's second part as well as the first part. Yes, it is really difficult to bring so many different communities together. We have engineers, we have biologists, we have chemists, and possibly physicists and material scientists as well. I think what would be really useful, and this was done 10 years ago for the artificial photosynthesis community, which is a lot of different top players, so world-renowned scientists came together and they wrote an article together spelling out exactly what is needed, what are the agreed inputs and outputs, assessing what efficiency means. And this was so this is the very famous Blankenship et al. Article in Science published in 2011. And they also spelled out what would be needed for biologists and biology, what is needed to be achieved for that field to progress for energy conversion, and then also what was needed for the artificial side. But what they didn't really talk about was biohybrids, and I guess because it is a very new field. And so I think what would be really good is if we come together and really agree on inputs, outputs, what is efficiency, so that we're not comparing different things. And also we still haven't really decided what is sunlight. A lot of times we're reporting different inputs. So these type of things are quite important. So having consensus, having dialogues. And then the second part of Gustav's question, which is, what are the risks of working together? Would it diminish competition? I think I don't think it would. I think it's not mutually exclusive. You can work cooperatively, and you can work on your own project on the side, where you just concentrate on the one discipline, if you like, and probably your cooperative work will feed new innovations and ideas into your own work. So I don't think it's a risk at all. I think it would benefit your other research.
Also from my side, thanks to Gustav for the question. It's good to talk about this. So it seems it's a systemic question on how to fund science, probably more broadly, in particular cross-disciplinary fields and biohybrids. I think that the first issue that already arises with biohybrids, very often in many departments at universities, there's no natural home. So, you don't quite fit into the chemistry department, not quite into materials, not quite into biochemistry. So I think from a fundamental level, we also need some transformation in institutional structure in universities, but that's not quite the question. About funding, so Dan mentioned already the enormous scale of fossil funding, and I think the scale needs to change, and it should increase dramatically, and it should increase dramatically into a continuous way, which means not a splash of money and then withdraw it a couple of years later. That it would really be good to have a plan over the next 10, 20, 30 years from our global political leaders to see how they see I think the energy field in general developing and how the funding landscape will look like, and stick to it. I think what we see very often in many countries is there's too much alteration and not enough continuity, which of course is highly inefficient. To the competition, I come in a second. That's of course important. The one thing I lack completely at the moment, and this hints a bit what Jenny just said before as well, is actually there's no real global center for energy research more broadly. So I personally, I'm very confused. I do not understand where we have a global science effort with CERN with nuclear energy. We have ITER, a global effort on fusion reactors, but both of them, of course, I mean, ITER is connected to energy, but at a very basic science challenge. I mean, it's fantastic to have those, but energy is such an imminent challenge. It's a threat to our planet, but we have no global concentrated effort. So I think this really should be addressed, and COP26 could be the opportunity to discuss this. Why is there no global center on renewable energy, which of course should house something on biohybrids as well? So I think this is what we are lacking completely, and I do not understand. Then on the level of competition, I mean, Gustav, I completely agree with you. I think we want to work as a collective, but we don't want to lose our competitive, innovative edge. And I think this could be ensured also by breaking it down into different level structures. So I do not think that all money should now go into a global hub. I think there should be different levels. I personally find that single lab projects today are underfunded. And the reason is because I feel a lot of innovation and new ideas actually do not come out of large hubs. Large hubs are really great when the innovation, maybe the seed has been laid, and then to grow it and really deep dig and profound and develop it maybe towards commercialization. But I personally think we need more funding actually for individuals just to probe new ideas. And then, of course, the other layer is then within a university or within a country coming together hubs. And we see those across a few countries. The US, of course, has a few initiatives very strong, in Japan as well. And these are important. So I think it should really go from single PI level to smaller national clusters to large national hubs, interdisciplinary collaborations, and then ultimately a global energy hub. I think this would, what I would see is a very productive and diverse set of funding, which could really drive innovation and change.
Dan, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. Well, I think the real, for at least biohybrids and a lot of energy research, the piece that's really missing is the scale up piece. So you have some big company over here who could move it. You have a PI over here. Then maybe the PI starts a company and then they build something. And what's missing is sort of the prototype scale up to what's called de-risk big investment. So I know in academics, we think we always hear about these things of investment called series A, B, C. And as academicians, we think you have a successful company at $50 million investment. Well, to go to market and energy, you need hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions. And so no company is going to take that risk. And so a big piece missing, especially in biohybrids, is get something back to what Shelley mentioned about reactor design, is there's this piece of funding after the discovery is made, and maybe you even get a company and you say you get this, would be a large amount of money, 20, 30 million pounds, euros, US dollars. That's still not good enough. You need this other piece in between to de-risk for the major investors to bring a discovery to technology fruition. So I think, by the way, Europe has done that much better than the US. And if you look, actually, what Shelley was mentioning, actually, in biotech and reactor design, Europe's way ahead of the US because of this type of funding. And so I think that is a major piece. But I do want to get back to what Nicolas said about the single PI. There was a famous author, Vonnegut, and when Vonnegut was asked about climate change, he responded, join a gang and do something about it. And the way the gang usually forms is it's from the single PI or a group of PIs who have a really neat discovery. When you have a really good discovery, a gang will start to form. And so while I'm talking about having this major funding for this missing link, I think, from discovery to technology, you need to make sure there's lots of flowers growing in the field. You can't just have one flower, and that's the single PI. And then the flower that looks most attractive, that's where all the bees will go and a gang will form. And so there's, again, always this or that, but you can't have the type of discovery we need with a lot of flowers in the field growing. And so it takes us, and I think Jenny and Erwin are proposing various funding models, but it takes the whole palette. And, you know, the American public and the public, and at least the American public, I'm sure in Europe too, they don't understand that every technology they're using right now, all the science was developed 20 or 30 years ago. And they say, why does it take so long? It takes long because of adoption and what people want to pay for it. That's society's choice, not science. Science lays out all the playing cards. And so in this problem, you need to make sure there's always this pipeline of discovery coming in so that when it needs to go to a technology, there's lots of choices to move forward for technology. So that's what scientists do. We don't determine what society chooses. What we do is we give lots of different options to society to choose from. And you have to ensure that that pipeline of options doesn't dry up, especially in this climate game. And certainly biohybrids is one of the more exciting new cards in the card deck of options for the future.
Which brings us on to two things actually that come up from what you're saying there, Dan. One is about commercialization, because you could argue, well, maybe it's not enough to just lay out your deck of cards, that actually, as we've seen with, say, COVID advice, sometimes just laying out the science doesn't always help people make a good choice. Is that how do you go about persuading big companies or the public that one biohybrid is perhaps, you know, a better fit than others? And also a question from Jeremy Allen here, which is about where you see the next significant advance coming in the biohybrid community. So there's another one of those potential flowers in your field. So whoever would like to take that, either of those, one or both, I'd be really interested to hear.
I really think for biohybrids, it's reactor design. You have to get the cell density, what these things called CFUs, colony forming units, up. So when you get to, Shelley mentioned efficiency, energy efficiency, and I think science is proving we can do that well. Shelley mentioned in wastewater treatment, now in a biofertilizer, I believe fuels will follow, but then there's a manufacturing efficiency. And there you need to have things grow at very high density, because those are basically your little manufacturing plants, the cells, and they have to be stable, or the enzymes, they have to be at high concentration, and they have to be stable. So I think I think science is off and running right now, but I think the sort of key engineering interface to that science is missing, personally. And I think that's what would really start to boost biohybrids. And you see it, what most people do with biohybrids is they choose a product that will have no impact on carbon. I mean, that's all we're talking about today. So you go choose some high value product that costs a lot of money, and you don't, it's going to have zero impact on carbon. And so that's what, that works for things like pharma, for a drug that you're going to sell at huge amounts. But it doesn't work for what we're talking about, which is pulling lots of carbon out of the air and making something and staying carbon neutral. And then as far as, you know, this virus, well, the unfortunate thing about climate change, I always told people, if you really wanted people to get worried about climate change, you would make carbon dioxide purple. And if it were purple, they would see it. And the problem with climate change is our society doesn't react to anything, and COVID's a perfect example, until it's a threat. And so they don't understand they're under massive threat because carbon dioxide isn't purple. So it's going to take a large piece of the Greenland ice shelf to fall into the ocean, unfortunately, and raise sea level by 2 feet immediately before anybody, I think, really gets serious. They need to, so, you know, we've all been talking about it. As a matter of fact, the more we talk about threat, I think we scare the public. And then there's a large part of the public, when they're scared, they bury their heads in the sand and they just want to forget about it. So I don't really know without a major catastrophe, except if we could make carbon dioxide purple.
Anyone else would like to add to that about commercialization, or where the next biohybrid potentially will be coming from?
Just very brief from my side. I think synthetic biology will really be very big for the biohybrids. And I'm not saying this because it's not already happening. Of course, there are groups doing a lot of innovative work, but I do not feel that the real expert core synthetic biologists en masse are actually aware of the potential of this field. And I think once they will join forces with us, And there will be very fast development, because from a chemist point of view, on my point of view, very often we look at microbes, you look at input, output, and in a very naive, more or less almost a black box fashion. But once we really learn the power and work with these people together, there will be a myriad of chemistry we can do. And I think it will really develop very quickly from there. Plus, of course, the interface, but that's more in the details.
I fully agree with Dan that the next frontiers or the next breakthrough are going to come from reactors. We need to design these reactors at pilot scale. And for that, we as scientists, we need incentive. We need to be forced somehow to connect to engineers, to a synthetic biologist, and to really gather competencies where this can be done. Of course, we need to preserve our ecosystem. We need individuals, we need small communities, we need a diverse ecosystem where all scientists can bring their chemistry and their creativity, but we are at a point where we need both in photo biohybrid approach, electrochemical biohybrid approach, biohybrid approach. We need to set these reactors. We need to make them, and we have the chemistry to do it. We need the creative engineering and the association of competencies to do it. But we need to do it also now, without waiting for the change in the economy or suddenly that these people that are governing us realize that they should put money not on fossil fuels or nuclear, but on renewable energies.
Yeah, just one quick thing, Sue. When I say reactors too, I don't mean that it's a bunch of chem engineers building a silver cylinder. You need to have, what I'm really saying is you need high cell density, and that means you need lots of basic science. How do you keep the microbiology? How do you interface in the chemistry materials? The materials thing that's giving the nutrients at high throughputs. So when I say reactor, it's not to say, oh, you just need a bunch of engineers. It's all this basic science working hand in hand with the engineers. So I don't want to leave the impression that it's really, I even see it with what I'm doing now. There's huge basic science issues we have to keep confronting to get the cell density up in a proper reactor design. So I just don't want to leave that misimpression that it's an engineering problem. It's a basic science problem, working with engineering.
I agree, but I will go a step further. We need both. We need both now.
There's a lot of nods there from the panel. Before we finish, let's just use this opportunity to just give your final thoughts about this area and perhaps your either beliefs or hopes for the future, as obviously coming up with the COP talks, a lot of people will be thinking about our sustainable future. Jenny, if we could start with you.
Yeah, so perhaps this also kind of bridges back to what we were talking about in the last session. I think there's a lot of unexplored approaches, new breakthroughs that we haven't actually combined with this particular problem. So going back to what Erwin said about synthetic biology, you know, we have CRISPR now, we have directed evolution. These are the type of things we need to really inject into this field to push it. And the same thing with material science to develop the biointerface and to increase cell density, what Dan is saying. You know, there's a lot of different ways we can tailor material to cells, and we need to work together with engineers, material scientists, and biologists together for that. So I think it's a very exciting field because there's just so many possibilities. We have not, I don't think we've even scratched the surface of what we can do, and so I really look forward to some of the breakthroughs that will come up hopefully very soon. Thank you. Nicolas.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, this has been really inspiring for me, this exchange today. And what really struck with me right now is also a bit what I came in with in this meeting is this need for really being fundamental, understanding these systems, because there's such a diversity of options of ways to address either fuels or chemicals or just energy conversion with either whole cells or isolated enzymes and bio-inspired systems. And some of them are really close to the application. We might have some that are ready for commercialization, but there are so many approaches that are just untouched, and we just need to push to see how much we can reach performances that are compatible with the real life applications. So really cool for pushing on the fundamentals and on the breakthrough that are at hand for our community.
Thank you. Erwin, your final thoughts?
Yes, I will just repeat my wish from before. If COP26 could be the starting point for a global center on renewable energy, that includes, of course, biohybrids, on the scale of ITER or CERN, this would be fantastic, or more funded on the scale of fossil subsidies we see at the present. I think the general public actually would support that, I'm sure, and I also hope that the public will ask for this in the future. So my wish is global energy center.
Shelley.
Yeah, so I think, we see all the things that synthetic biologists have been focused on in the last 15 years, and those have been mostly focused on the chemistry and not the electron transfer. And I think over the last 10 years, while they were working on the chemistry, we have had a lot of people who have been fundamentally trying to understand extracellular electron transfer. And now we kind of need to train the next generation of synthetic biologists that aren't just thinking about chemistry, but they're also thinking about the extracellular electron transfer and basically designing a synthetic biology toolkit for that.
Marc.
I vote for the Global Center of Erwin, which will include diverse people where fundamental science can go on, and at the same time, in the same place or with the same set of mind, there will be people taking care of the engineering of scaling up these reactors. And in these centers, we need to bring massively young students to work in this field, because we need also this global energy we can feel around the world, that this young generation of people is very aware of what's going on and want to do something. So come to the Global Center of Erwin and work there.
And finally, Dan.
Okay, we'll keep voting for Erwin. But Erwin, there's one thing you have wrong. You did it from a science basis, and it's COP26, and these are politicians. So the way to do what I think you want, and this actually is something I've talked about before, we have, for instance, in the US, a US Department of Energy, but it's a global problem. So what you need is the global Department of Energy. And once that's established and you have politicians there to screw everything up, then they can do the funding you want. So I think you got to go one step higher, and it's got to be a political agenda that everybody buys into globally. And the way to do that is set up a Department of Energy for the Earth. And that's what they could do at COP26. And then I think the funding would follow naturally, as well as correct policy. So it would be a coordinated global effort.
Thank you. That's great. And it's been a really interesting discussion. I quite like the idea of a global Department of Energy, or a COP26 for the Earth. It's been extremely inspiring. It's been incredibly interesting. And I think what's clear is also about the potential, the huge role that chemistry is playing and will play in the future. And that concludes our Royal Society of Chemistry Biohybrid Approaches for Sustainable Energy Conversion discussion. My thanks to our excellent panelists today. They are Nicolas Plumeré from the Technical University of Munich, Dr. Jenny Zhang and Professor Erwin Reisner, both from the University of Cambridge, Dan Nocera from Harvard University, Shelley Minteer from the University of Utah, and Marc Robert from the University of Paris. And thank you too for watching. You can find more Royal Society of Chemistry discussions around the United Nations COP26 programme on the website of the Royal Society of Chemistry, which is at rsc.li/COP. followed by the numbers 26, or also on their social media channels. So I hope you'll join me, Sue Nelson, and a host of expert guests for more episodes in the series as we explore chemistry's vital contribution to electrifying the planet's energy transition to net zero and powering new discoveries and innovations.
The chemical sciences are at the heart of sustainability solutions. Sustainability, powered by chemistry.